Hi everyone. Every once in a while, we have some new students joining our meditation sangha, and especially the guided session, because sometimes these are very experienced meditator, and they just wanted to experience our tradition. So I want to take this opportunity then to kind of give an overview of what we try to do in these guided sessions. So first of all, I want to explain the name of our club, which as it turns out, I really haven't explained it to anyone. We call ourselves the Kusala Club. So Kusala means wholesome or virtuous in Sanskrit, whereas the opposite of Kusala is Akusala, which means unwholesome. So in order to explain the difference between wholesome and unwholesome thoughts, I really have to have a quick overview of the five skandhas. I know many of us practice together at St. Quentin, so we have had some discussions on the Heart Sutra, and one of the most important phrase in the Heart Sutra is five skandhas are empty. So I'm going to try to explain what the five skandhas are, and then with that, then I'll be able to explain what is considered kusala and what is considered akusala. Okay, so skandhas means aggregates, right? So this is the five aggregates. So it's kind of hard to visualize what is an aggregate. What does it have to do with the five skandhas? So the easiest thing to do is think of a funnel. You know, an aggregate is like you take something, collect something, and then on the other end, you deliver something. So think of aggregate as a funnel. So the five skandhas are kind of like five funnels connecting one to the other. And the five skandhas are form, sensation, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. So let's talk about the first skandha, the form skandha, right? The form skandhas take the five stimulants and deliver to our five sense organs. So when we talk about sense organs, sometimes we use the word sense doors. Right? Doors is like you open the door, something comes in, and then you close the door. So the five sense organs are the eyes, the nose, the ears, the tongue, and then our body like the skin, right? And then the eyes are always sensitive to sight. So the sight is one of the stimulants. The other stimulants are the smell for the nose, the taste for the tongue, the sound for the ear, and the touch for our body, for our skin. So essentially, the form skandhas, the form aggregates, with the stimulants on one side and the sense organ the other, is the totality of our physical existence, both outside of our body and inside of our body, right? So on one hand, you can say the stimulants are like the physics, the sense organs like the physiology, okay? And together, we call this the form aggregate, okay? And of the five aggregate, this is the only one that is physical. The rest are metaphysical, okay? And then, so the next one is called sensation, sometimes called feeling. Unfortunately, the word doesn't really reflect the representation, because when we say sensation or feeling, there's a sense that there's a judgment, right? When we sense something or feel something, there's sort of a I like it, I don't like it kind of a judgment. In this case, there is none of that. In this case, it's strictly a conversion from a physical organ to electricity, right? So the sensation aggregate is something that connects the sense organs to a set of electricity called the consciousness. So for example, we talk about the form aggregate, the sight hitting the eye, and then now the eye generates electricity. And then that electricity is called the eye consciousness. Similarly, there's the nose consciousness, the smell consciousness, the taste consciousness, the hearing consciousness, and the touch consciousness. Okay, so essentially, if you think of this in 3 columns, the first column are the stimulants, the second columns are the sense organs, and then the third columns are the consciousness. The first column is the physics, the middle column is the physiology, and then the third columns are the neurology. Okay, so if I put in front of you again, I use an example of a chocolate ice cream, and then next to that I put out a replica of the chocolate ice cream. Your eyes couldn't tell the difference because they're both brown color, right? But your nose might be able to sense the difference. Your taste certainly can. Your ear cannot because it makes no sound, and your touch can, right? But each one of those are independent of another. So at this point, there's really no feeling yet. Okay, it's just a bunch of electricities that are all independent of each other. So the next aggregate, the perception aggregate, takes the 5 consciousness and deliver it to the 5th sense organ. In this case, we call that the mind, or we sometimes call the mind root. Okay, that's the perception consciousness. That's delivering the electrical signal to another organ. All right. So in that sense, you can argue that the 5 stimulants, the eyes, the sights, the smell, the taste, the sound, and the contact, the 5 stimulants are external stimulants, whereas the 5 consciousness, the 5 electrical signals that are generated by those 5 organs are the internal stimulants, right? Because they stimulate the mind root, okay? Then the 4th scander is called sankhara. And in English it's called mental formation or mental volition. What this does is that it actually aggregate those 5 consciousness and then generate a thought, a mind consciousness. Okay, it actually generates thought and says, "Oh, ice cream, right? Oh, chocolate ice cream, I like it, right? Oh, it's just a replica. Somebody's playing trick on me." Okay, so that's the mind consciousness. Okay, and so if we go back a bit, I would explain how our existence consists of 8 consciousness. So the first 5 are the one that I mentioned, which are the one generated by the eye, the nose, the tongue, the ear, and the body. That's 1 to 5. Then the 6th consciousness is the one that is generated by the mind root. Okay, for now we say it's the brain, but it's more than the brain. But let's just say that it is a brain. Okay, so your brain is the one that collects all the electrical signal from your sensors, and then they generate a collective electrical signal called the mind consciousness, and that's the 6th consciousness. Okay. Now there's one more. Aggregate. I'll come to that later. But for now, let me kind of explain a little bit more about the mind consciousness, the 6th consciousness. So in Buddhism, they actually gives a lot more detail on what is called the mind consciousness, that the mental volition. They actually say that it can be broken down into 51 mental factors. some of which are very biological. But then there's a bunch that they call the Kusala mental factors, the wholesome mental factors. And then there's a whole bunch more that are called Akusala mental factors. And together, combining these are our thoughts. So let's take a look of the Kusala mental formations, mental factors. Faith, mindfulness, energetic, shame, consequence, non-attachment, non-aggression, calmness, equanimity, conscience, non-injurious. In other words, don't hurt other people, don't do upon others as you would do upon you. That's one of the good quality, one of the kusala. Now the bad ones, the akusalas, are many, right? So just a few. Delusion, lack of shame, disregard for consequence, restlessness, greed, wrong view, conceit, hatred, envy, sloth, doubt, and the list just goes on. Now, there is something called the Five Hindrances. The Five Hindrances are kind of a collection of those bad seeds, bad thoughts, the akusala, the unwholesome thoughts. The Five Hindrances are, and this is the one we kept coming back to. It just is now a shorthand for all the bad stuff, all the akusala thoughts, all the unwholesome thoughts. So the Five Hindrances are, the first one is attachment or clinging, specifically the attachment and clinging to a sensory pleasure. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a good cup of coffee. The problem is that if you spill that cup of coffee and now you get all upset because you're still so attached to the sensation, that would be bad, right? That would be clinging to something that is impermanent, right? Aversion, so you like something and then now it's gone. All of a sudden you start to have what is called ill will. You start to have resentment, hostility, bitterness, hatred. That would be bad, right? So that kind of groups it all together, called aversion. The third one is called sloth, right? Where you just like lack of energy. You know you should be doing something, you just don't feel like doing it. You feel sleepy, sense of inertia, depression. That would be bad. Then you have the opposite of sloth, which is restlessness, inability to calm the mind. Those who can't sleep at night, that's the hindrance. And finally, and the one that we come back to, is called doubt. Lack of conviction, lack of trust, lack of faith, right? So again, let's go back. The first four aggregate defines, the first one particularly defines your material existence. That's called the form. That's when the outside stimulants, the sound, the sight, the taste, the touch, the smell, get into contact with your sense organs, your eye, your nose, your mouth, your ear, your body. That's the first scanner. The second scanner generates electrical signal. It's your neurons working, and it goes from the five sense organs to the five consciousness, each one independent of another. The third scanner is called perception. It takes the five independent electrical signal and feed it into your brain, right? Your mind root. And then finally, the mental formation is the one that collects. After it collects all these neuron signal, activates the big neuron, which is the brain, and generate a thought, right? A mind consciousness. And it could be an wholesome thought, it could be an unwholesome thought, but if you break it into parts, it's called the 51 mental factors. But in collection, the akusala thoughts can be collected into the five hindrances. But that only accounts the first four, right? That only accounts the first. Now, Buddhism is different from every other school of thought in that it introduces the concept of karma. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of what karma is. Karma is very simple. Karma is a record. If you have an electrical signal, it generates magnetism. And if you have a magnetic force, it would leave behind a record, right? Because all materials are ferromagnetic, so therefore all materials are magnetic, ferromagnetic or not. It's just a degree. And then so the idea is that if you have a thought, because the only way that you could have a thought is you excite some neurons, which means that you have generated electricity. Physics demands that there's magnetism associated with these electricities, and physics demand that there's a record for that. And that record is karma. That means that every thought you have, not the action that you do, the thoughts that you have create a record. And that record is called karma. We don't know where to store it. It could be stored in your brain. It could be stored in your spine. We don't know. It's stored somewhere. Okay? Now, but it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because karma is both a result and a cause. In other words, it's both a record. Karma is both a record and a dormant energy. Again, going back to magnetism. If you generate electricity, it leaves behind a magnetic record. However, the next time that magnetic record is actually a dormant force, and it influences your next thought. Okay? And so in that sense, our thoughts are not independent of a karma. All right? Our thoughts are not independent of a karma. And if you remember, when we talk about the 5 sense organs, we talk about them being the eye, the nose, the tongue, the ear, and the body. Then the corresponding stimulants for that would be the sight, the smell, the taste, the sound, and the touch. But if you were to include the mind as a sense organ, the corresponding stimulant for that is called Dhamma with the lowercase d. And Dhamma basically means mental phenomenon. So the mental phenomenon is actually more than just the 5 independent consciousness associated with the 5 sense organ. It is in fact karma. So your mental formation is not just a linear consequence of your sensing organs. It's actually also influenced by what is in your karma. Okay? So let me explain that in terms of just hang on, then let me explain that in terms of the instead of looking at this from the 5 skandhas, there's a different way of looking at the same thing, and it's called the 12 links of dependent origination. So first of all, there's a lot of confusion about what is dependent origination or dependent arising. So to the Chinese translation of that is actually very simple. The Chinese translation for that is yun hei. Yun is condition. Hei is arising. Okay? So let me explain what a condition is. So imagine you're trying to plant some tomatoes in your backyard. So you have to start with some tomato seeds. Now, if you don't plant any tomato seeds, you wouldn't have any tomatoes, right? So there's no, if you think about it in terms of causality, there's no possibility of having fruit if you didn't have the seed. But now that you have planted the seed, it doesn't automatically generate fruit. You still have to put a lot of effort in watering the plant, giving it nutrient, all that stuff. So those are actually conditioned. They are conditioned, and they are conditioned. And it's because of those conditions that arises the fruit, right? So one doesn't automatically goes to another. There has to be something in between. But now imagine that tomato that you grow. In the tomato, there is more seeds, right? So actually there's sort of a closed loop situation here, that you start with a seed. Now let's go back to our mind. So imagine somewhere in there you have a thought, fear. Well, when you have that thought of fear, it goes away, right? Eventually. However, in the process of having a thought, because of the electrical signal, it leaves behind a record of that in the karma. Okay? However, when you have a thought again, the next thought is not independent. The next thought is actually influenced by your previous thoughts. So as you grow, as you have more and more fear in your life, fear dominates. Okay? So actually, if you look at the 12 links of independence, dependence, origination, it's a circle with 12 links, and we only need to look at the first few. The first one is called ignorance. Ignorance is in Sanskrit is vaja, V-I-J-J-A, right? V-I-J-J-A has some deep meaning, but essentially it means understanding and awareness. In fact, it's one of the terms that we use to describe Buddha, someone who's awakened. So avijja is the opposite of that. That's why we call it ignorance. Those are your ignorant seeds. Those are your Kusala seeds. Those are your unwholesome seeds. The next one is called Sankhara. Sankhara, again, it's a Sankhara, it's like the Sankhara skandhas, right? It's the one that it's like an engine. It takes the ignorant seed that comes from your karma. It activates the engine, the mental engine. And then the next one is called consciousness. This is the one that actually creates the 51 mental factors. But up to now, nothing happens, right? It's just all in your mind. However, the next one is called Nama Rupa. Nama Rupa. Nama is name, Rupa is form. It's some ways explaining as mind and matter. Well, that is your mind. That is your mind root. That is your mind. Your mind, earlier I talked about your mind being your brain. Well, that's only half of your mind. That actually is only half of your mind. It's the physical part of your mind. It's the material part of your mind, right? It's the rupa. There's right next to that, there's something else. That actually is what we call the seven consciousness. The seven consciousness. So the seven consciousness is the mono consciousness. Another way to explain that is our self. That is our ego. That is where all the attachment and clinging comes from. So if you look at how that works, is that you have the ignorance, the akusala, unwholesome seeds. It generates a thought, and then it's a thought that pushes the brain to then go to the next link, which is the six sense bases. These are the six sense organs. These are the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the tongue, the ear, and the body, and the brain, right? So essentially, when we talk about fear, it's not the virus, right? Right now we talk a great deal about the coronavirus, and we generate a lot of fear and anxiety from the coronavirus, which is very true. However, the fear and the anxiety and all the other unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome seeds, are actually in your karma. You already have those. They're just waiting for the right condition to express itself. Okay? They're just waiting for. So, take a very simple example. You and I could be experience the same, to have the same experience, but we could have very different reaction, right? So, for example, we talk between the few of us. We talk a lot about addictions, right? Addiction to substance, addiction to cocaine. And I explained that, well, we are not really addicted to cocaine. We're addicted to the sensation we get after we consume cocaine. The cocaine is the external stimulant. But what we are reacting to is the attachment and the clinging and everything else that is already in a karma. That's where it starts. They're the ignorance of they're the first link of the 12 links of what we call the 12 links of Natana, the 12 links of dependent origination. And then they get excited, and then eventually they excite our brain, and then now we go search for them. We now go search for them, right? So in that sense, we are all addicted. We are all addicts. We're all addicted to our ignorance, right? We're all addicts, and some are addicted to cocaine, and some are addicted to fear, anxiety, right? We're all addicted to that sensation. It's kind of difficult to explain, but those who are prone to violence, they're addicted to the sensation of violence, right? So I remember I talked about this, and I said, wow, what a wonderful letter, what a wonderful poem when a gentleman talks about how coronavirus, as fearful as it is, it still needs the host, right? Without the host, it doesn't even have a life. So it has to have a host. So all we have to know is we just need to learn how to protect ourselves. We need to do social distancing, so we're at least 6 feet away from the next person who might not be infected. We have to wear face covering so that when we're outside and inadvertently touch surfaces that are contaminated, we don't want to bring that into our mouth and our nose and our eyes. So we have to wear face covering and goggle. We have to wash our hands constantly. Why are we doing that? We're robbing the virus of its host. So the virus for our mind is our ignorance. The virus for our mind are all the unwholesome seeds in a karma. So our practice is really about robbing our mental virus of their host. And their hosts rest in our mind, in the Rupa Nama part link of the 12 links, right? So how do we do that? Well, remember the Rupa Nama has two parts, right? The Rupa part is a big brain. That's a physical part of our mind. The Nama part is the metaphysical part of our mind. That's the seven consciousness, the monoconsciousness. That's the self. So when Joanne Macy talks about the Shambhala warriors and how they have in their hands the two weapons, the compassion and the wisdom, that's what they're talking about, is that the compassion is the one that tames the self. And if you can tame the self, then you have robbed the mental virus of their host. And of course, how do we tame the self? Well, we practice compassion, and one way, the most common way, is the practice of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, empathy, and equanimity. We practice loving kindness to eliminate hostility. We practice compassion to eliminate suffering. We practice empathy to eliminate jealousy. We practice equanimity to eliminate arrogance. That's taming of the self, right? The other way is to work on the other half of the Rupa Nama chain link of the 12 links of Nadana, which is the mind itself, which is the analytical mind, the physical mind, the big brain. And we do that by practicing what we call wisdom or panya. Right? That's where the meditation comes in. So one of the challenge of the meditation is to find the balance. So many of you come from the Zen tradition, in particular the Soto Zen tradition. So you talk a great deal about something called Shinkatasa. In Chinese, it's called Ji Gun Da Zhou. However, there's a great misunderstanding of what Shinkatasa means. Shinkatasa comes from a concept called the silent illumination. In Chinese, it means mak jiu. Okay? Silent illumination. So what does it mean? What does silent illumination mean? So silent mak means, mak in Chinese it doesn't just mean quiet, it means non-responding. Okay? So if I try to disturb you and you don't even acknowledge me and you stay silent. So, for example, you're working on your desk and I try to wave at you and try to get you to respond to me, and you don't. Right? You don't say anything to me. You don't respond. That's called mak. Mak is that kind of silence. So it means that it's the one half of the practice is the one that says that we have to put ourselves in the state of mind so that we're not affected by any outside factors. We're not affected by the sight, the sound, the taste, and the smell, and the touch. But more important than that is that we're not excited by the inferences of our own mind. Right? We're not influenced by the Kusala seeds that are stored in a karma, and or more specifically the 5 hindrances. Okay, so or silence just means that we're maintaining steadiness of a mind by not being influenced by both the outside and the inside. Then the second word, this is silent illumination, mak jiu. Jiu is illuminate. Jiu means more than illuminate. It also means reflection, right? So it's really maintaining total awareness and alertness to our own state of mind, and being alert to even changes in the surroundings. So when we say silent, it doesn't mean that we shut off our ears. It's not like putting cottons in an ear. Okay? Putting cottons in your ear and blindfold yourself doesn't make you a meditator. It is really the total awareness of what's outside, but not understanding it, but not following it. Okay? So in our practice, when we do our guided meditation, I talk about being relaxed and alert at the same time. It's the same thing, right? It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Being relaxed, okay, but alert. Because very often you get too relaxed. People know how to relax, and they get too relaxed. Then their mind gets dull and they go to sleep, or I call that the lazy Zen. Okay, you can't have that. That's a waste of time. The other possibility is that you're so alert, your mind is so alert, right? Your 5 senses, your eye, your nose, your tongue, your ear, they actually get very quiet, but you don't know how to. You have forgotten that you need to tame the mind as well, and now your mind gets very excited, and you start to use it as a thinking tool, and I call that the untethered Zen. Right? In fact, it's very dangerous. You can then start to hallucinate. Right? It could be quite dangerous. So when we rest ourselves, that's compassion. When we rest our mind, our brain, right, that's our practice. So how do you do that? How do you rest your brain so that you're totally relaxed but totally alert at the same time. Well, that's the practice. That's why you have to come. Because here what we're doing is very simple. We're using a breath as a bridge to build the bridge between our brain, between our body and our mind, between the physical part of our brain and the metaphysical part of our mind. And what we're trying to do is to discover and maintain a separation between the Kaya and the Nama. And if you can do that, then you have broken the 12 links of Ladana, the 12 links of dependent origination. And if you can do that, then you have robbed the virus of its host. And all those akusala thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, they don't even have a life. Okay? And one more thing before I finish. I mentioned the Manjusri Bodhisattva. Those who have practiced in St. Quentin, I remind you that on the podium, or what we call the, what's that called? The table where we put our incense. There is 2 statues. The one behind it is called it's a historical Buddha. The one in front of it, you can tell that it's a Bodhisattva statue, but probably not so clear. Not clear if you understood which Bodhisattva that is. The Bodhisattva of compassion, Guan Yin, we all know. This is a different one. This is called the Bodhisattva of Wisdom, the Manjushri Bodhisattva. And you notice that it has a blade. It holds a blade with his right hand that is in the shape of like a flame. And that is actually not a knife, and not a sword, not a blade. It's actually a blunt instrument. And it is to remove ignorance and doubt. And it is, in fact, to open up the space between yourself and your cerebral, your big brain. Okay? So I hope that helps. And then the rest are practice. So I'll welcome you to our practice, especially to the guided practice. And it's called resting of the mind, resting of the brain. It can also be called single-minded sitting. In the Soto tradition, it's a single-minded sitting. It's the deeper meaning of Shinkatasa. It's part of the silent illumination. Okay? And resting of the brain requires both a destiny and a journey, just like taking vacation. Not going to work is not enough to call it a vacation. You need a destiny and a journey. So that's 30 minutes of journey. Okay? So look forward to seeing all of you. Thank you very much.